Now you can hear Military Matters Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard and Sundays at noon on Wreaths Across America Radio, available on the iHeart Radio, TuneIn and Audacy apps. This episode is brought to you by Homes for Our Troops, a nonprofit helping build and donate homes to injured post 9/11 veterans. Visit hfotusa.org for more information. I'm Rod Rodriguez. This is Military Matters. Folks, this is the last full episode of Military Matters. It doesn't look like we'll be getting a last-minute pot of funds for the next year. No cavalry coming this time. But that's all right. I'm breaking out an episode from earlier this year that we didn't release due to an audio error. If I sound a little tinny in this episode, and by tinny, it's like I don't sound like I have any bass at all. It's because when we recorded the settings, the settings didn't pick up the microphone that I typically use, and instead recorded from my webcam, which, needless to say, doesn't do recording voices very well. So we decided to scrap and reschedule the whole episode and do it for next season. But since it doesn't look like we're going to get another season or another crack at this one, I wanted to still share this episode with you because it's interesting. It's all about quantum mechanics and defense. So unless you've been living under a rock for the last 20 years, the term quantum has crept into your life at some point. From the popular show Quantum Leap in the 90s to the superhero comics of today with the multiverse and all this other stuff, it's all to do with quantum mechanics. Now, it would be easy to relegate the whole idea to science fiction or that part of the brain that says, well, that's like 50 years from now. It doesn't affect me. Well, I'm here to tell you that it does. And my guest for this episode sheds some light on what all the fuss is about quantum technology, how it applies to the defense industry, and how it applies to you right now. Dr. Joe Altpeter is a quantum physicist at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, commonly referred to as DARPA. Dr. Altpeter doesn't just work on cutting-edge technology. He's working in a place where he shares a hallway with our nation's foremost experts on all subjects related to quantum technology and quantum research. So what does that actually mean? It means he can poke his head out of his office and ask a question and either get an answer or stir up a hive of super smart people wondering how to answer his question. So like I said before, sorry about my side of the audio on this one, but nevertheless, this is my interview with DARPA quantum physicist Dr. Joe Altpeter.
So my name's Joe Altpeter. I am a quantum physicist. A long time ago, I was a research professor at Northwestern University, and then I started acting as a subject matter expert for places like IARPA and DARPA, really the mad science divisions of the federal government. And I loved it. And now I'm in my fourth year as a civilian Department of Defense employee at DARPA. And I've been really lucky to be able to work on some really exciting programs, and including ones related to quantum computing.
I think it's really important for folks to understand just a very topical surface explanation of what it is that you're researching and a little bit about quantum mechanics, quantum physics as it is.
Yeah. So I think most people are familiar with the computers we use every day that run our cell phones and our laptops. And they at a basic level, they start with zeros and ones, what we call bits. And those are just a 0 and a 1, a yes or a no. Quantum computing is all about, well, what if we were able to build these as quantum objects, which means instead of just answering yes or no, they can be maybe, or they can be lots of different flavors of maybe. And in a very real way, these computers can exist in multiple states all at the same time, kind of like doing a computation in parallel. If you or your listeners think that sounds super weird or impossible, and you think that it sounds so weird you misunderstood what I was trying to say, you got it. You're right there. You understand quantum physics now for the purpose of our discussion. A lot of what I do is I try to figure out, would it be possible to build one of these really crazy machines? And if you built one, would it be useful for anything anyone cares about? And those are really big, really hard questions that thousands of people are spending billions of dollars around the world trying to figure out, and they're also super interesting. Did that help?
100%, 100%. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people think that computers are ones and zeros, and that's the way, for all intents and purposes, the way God intended. It should be black and white, yes or no. Why is maybe important? Why is maybe such a difficult thing to tackle, and why should we care?
That is a great question. So it turns out that when we try to think about how the stuff around us, just like chemistry, like material science, how do you build the hull of a ship? All of that, you can either make some approximations and think of all those atoms as kind of being the 0 and 1, the yes and the no. They're just, all the atoms are kind of in a spot. They fit together like Lego bricks. We're going to build whatever we want out of them. But we've known for decades now, really since the early 20th century, that that's not really true. A lot of times we can make those kinds of assumptions and we can build battleships and things just work. But sometimes things gets weird, and that's because we now understand that at a fundamental level, chemistry, our bodies, are quantum mechanical. So the molecules that make you and I up can themselves be in like multiple different shapes and positions all at the same time. Like our molecules themselves are constantly existing in a state of maybe, in the same way that we hope to build a quantum computer. And the hope is for lots of these problems, we can't figure out what's really going on because of the weirdness with which chemistry works, because of the quantum mechanics. So let's just cut to the chase and build a computer that's weird in the same way that can give us better answers about how to understand the world around us and build better stuff.
Pop science has given us a lot of interesting explanations of quantum everything. It seems to be the new thing. At the end of Marvel's Endgame, we started this quantum thing, and it's kind of rippled across the world. But the concept behind the science fiction of quantum has been around there for a hot bit. I remember as a kid watching a film called Sneakers with Robert Redford, and it was about this powerful computer that could break all the codes in the world. And that's kind of been tied inherently to the research in quantum computing, that you and other researchers will fall upon the holy grail of quantum computing, and it will just, no more secrets, as Sneakers said, right? No more secrets. So tell me a little bit about the actual real world application of quantum computing. Are we looking at a world where there's no more encryption, that whoever holds this holds the keys to everything? Or is this, and I'm sure it is, more complicated than that?
So it's definitely more complicated than that. For the questions about encryption specifically, I'm going to try to direct you to people who are smarter than myself about these issues. I know NIST has published things about this. NSA has published things about this. Very briefly, it is true that for certain types of our encryption, for like RSA encryption, we've built that encryption around the assumption that a certain kind of math problem, which is factoring large numbers, is really, really hard, bordering on impossible. And that's one of the things that has been looked at, like people have looked the most at for quantum computers. And we think that if you had a big enough quantum computer that was high enough quality, you'd be able to factor certain problems. And NIST and NSA publications have told us that that would be a problem we should protect against. What we do at DARPA actually is, because we like to look at the problems that nobody else has looked at, we tend not to look at that factoring problem, because that's what the most work has been done on, and there are agencies who do a smarter job than that. We tend to think about, well, it's been suggested that there's a dozen other fields, from chemistry to material science to machine learning to you name it, who's somebody who's saying a quantum computer is going to revolutionize. It's going to be phenomenal. And we tend to take a skeptical but curious eye to these things, and we would like to find out if those claims are true or not. So we tend to think about the crazier applications of quantum computers than factoring.
Tell me about that crazier aspect of quantum computing. Take me down that rabbit hole. What are you guys looking at applying quantum mechanics or quantum computing to that kind of goes past the pop science, multiverse, encryption stuff? What are we not looking at?
Yeah. So I work at DARPA, right, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Our goal is to prevent strategic surprise. And so when I think about this area, I really think of it as the poster child for potential for strategic surprise. And the reason is when I think about the 10 smartest physicists that I know, who are all much smarter than me, about half of them are in fact convinced that quantum computers are going to be the most important technology of the 21st century. They are going to revolutionize chemistry and material science and mathematics and artificial intelligence. The other five are convinced that if you could build a perfect quantum computer, which you definitely will not be able to do, it will do nothing more useful than a regular computer, which means that the best minds that I know put quantum computers' impact somewhere between totally useless and completely transformative. And so I can't really think of a better potential for surprise than it's somewhere between useless and the best thing since sliced bread. And so that's why we're doing it. The specific applications that people suggest that we're looking at are things like, we know we spend billions of dollars trying to prevent corrosion in Navy ships. We know we spend a huge amount trying to overcome the effects of turbulence in the atmosphere for all kinds of things. We know that we need to understand basic chemistry for things like better drug discovery, for understanding how the human body works, for making better batteries that let soldiers carry less stuff. It's been suggested that this could be the key to fixing global warming by coming up with better ways to make fertilizer or to understand power generation. Like really, you can't throw a stone in the physics community without finding a proposed revolutionary use for quantum computers. Figuring out whether they can really work is a really huge challenge. And the way that I would encourage you to think about this is like, think about you're back in 1950, right? Alan Turing, the greats of computer science, had already postulated that, we could build these giant digital computers and they might be able to do awesome mathematical things. And now try to think about all the ways that digital computers have changed our lives. They don't match very closely science fiction books you might read from the 50s. And so we've learned a lot, but we're kind of in the same boat where we're trying to figure out what exactly would a computer we know works fundamentally differently than anything we have now and is impossible to simulate using the tools we have now. How is that going to change our lives? Now, DARPA's equal, this is the kind of challenge we love to take on, but it's really hard. And I don't have a clear answer right now. I think DARPA thinks it could still be they're useless or they're totally transformative. And I have a couple of programs to try to dig into how we're going to try to make progress on that.
Let's assume, and I always love the miracle day question, tomorrow you wake up and you did it. Dr. Alpeter and his team, they did it. They have achieved a quantum computer. What would be the difference between what you've created and the computer you're monitoring that creation on? So, you've got your MacBook Pro out, top of the line, Apple, and then you've created this quantum computer. What's the fundamental difference between these two devices, and how would you know that you did it?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And so this is actually the whole goal of my quantum benchmarking program, is that, I think you've hit on a really tricky part, which is, if you think about how we benchmark classical computers, right? How I build a new supercomputer, how do I know whether it's working well? We typically just ask it to do some hard calculation, and then we do things like measure how fast it can get the calculation done. And nobody ever mentions this, but there's always an extra step where we check its answer against a different classical computer, or 10 more. But if the calculation's impossible for anything but a quantum computer, what's the yardstick we're going to use to actually measure if it works at all, much less what's the impact of the new machine that you postulated, right, from Miracle Day? That's a really hard, DARPA hard challenge. And so we've got a program where we're trying to figure out exactly that. And that's key, because we have some metrics today for tracking progress in quantum computers, but mostly they track, can I build a machine next year that's twice as quantum as the machine I have this year? One of my colleagues, Brian Jacobs at MTO at DARPA, likes to say that building a useful quantum computer is really hard. It's like trying to build a rocket ship to the moon. We want to make sure we're not measuring progress by measuring how high our planes fly, because we got to measure it towards the actual goal. So one of the things I might try if I had that new machine is, hey, simulate a new molecule for me. Like, tell me what the ground state energy of some exotic, strongly correlated molecule is, and then I'm going to use that for a drug discovery or a material science or a battery catalysis problem. But a lot of times what'll happen is somebody will come to me, right? Like we're the mad science part of the government. People come and ask us for money. They're like, hey, Joe, I got a fantastic, brilliant idea for a new quantum computer. It's going to knock your socks off. You give me enough money, I'll build a machine that'll calculate molecule X for you. It's going to be great. But one of the great things about DARPA is you're surrounded by these amazing people. So I walk across the hall to my friend Anne, who's a quantum chemist, and I say, hey, I'm not a quantum chemist. Do you care about molecule X? Like somebody wants to give me an answer to this. What do you think? And almost always what'll happen is they'll say, well, actually, no, I already know the answer to molecule X. I got to totally I can do that on my home machine. I don't care at all. Or they'll say, you're right, that is a totally impossible calculation, but I don't care about the answer. Having the answer will not make any difference to my life. And so one of the things we try to do is get the quantum physicists who are trying to understand what a quantum computer is capable of in the same room as the expert in the field that they're trying to revolutionize. So we can build a new yardstick that measures progress towards a capability that would be really transformative. And so we have hope that, we'll be able to do things like solve the corrosion problem or make better batteries or make, better pharmaceuticals discoveries to cure disease. But even coming up with the yardstick where we measure if we succeeded and measure progress towards that goal is itself super hard because we're dealing with impossible calculation engines.
Homes for Our Troops, HFOT, is a publicly funded nonprofit organization that builds and donates specially adapted custom homes nationwide for severely injured post 9/11 veterans to enable them to rebuild their lives. These homes restore some of the freedom and independence our veterans sacrificed while defending our country. Nearly 90 cents out of every dollar spent has gone directly to supporting our veterans and enabling them to rebuild their lives. Visit hfotusa.org. That's hfotusa.org to learn more. Wreaths Across America Radio is a voice for America's veterans, an awesome mix of contemporary country, patriotic, and public service programming. And now Military Matters is proud to include itself into that mix. So now you can listen to this podcast, Military Matters, Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard and Sundays at noon on Wreaths Across America Radio, available on the iHeart Radio, TuneIn, and Audacy apps. Awesome. And it's an interesting problem that you have now, because it seems like maybe about 30, 40 years ago, the question was, what do we have all these questions. We have a pile of questions. Let's answer them. Now you have a different problem. You're trying to find the questions that haven't been answered. Because like you said, you might, hey, I got this thing about chemistry. Anne might say, no, we dealt with that like 2 years ago. Like, oh, well, and you wouldn't know that, obviously, because that's not your wheelhouse. You're not a quantum chemist. So now you have all of these wonderful experts at DARPA trying to figure out, like, what do you guys, what are your intelligence gaps? Let's answer the intel gaps. Going back to this Miracle Day question, you've created your quantum computer. What would Dr. Altpeter point it at? What would you, after you've done your benchmarking, you're like, holy smokes, guys, pop champagne, we did it. What would Dr. Altpeter point this machine at? What's the first problem you would say, like, this is what I'd love to see it tackle?
Yeah, so a great example that I use a lot when talking about this was a paper that came out a few years ago from the Microsoft quantum computing team. So it may sound like an unsexy topic, but one of the first applications people talk about is really making fertilizer. It's how can we make ammonia? Right now, it might surprise you that we actually spend somewhere between 1 and 2% of the entire global energy supply. Not like the Washington, D.C. energy supply, but Earth's energy supply, just smashing together nitrogen and hydrogen under incredibly high temperatures and incredibly high pressures to make ammonia, to make fertilizer to make plants grow. So what if we could just save the world 2% of its energy supply by figuring out a new way to do that just at regular temperatures and regular pressures so it didn't need that kind of energy? So we have hope that this might be possible because actually this is how Earth does it, right? Plants grew before humans were around to make fertilizer, and they do it using an enzyme called nitrogenase. But it turns out, even though this enzyme has been known for 100 years, people still don't understand the fundamental reaction mechanism at its core, which involves something called the iron molybdenum complex, or FMOCO for short. And this group at Microsoft published a paper saying, well, the key thing we don't have is the ability to calculate the energy of the ground state, kind of like the most relaxed state of that piece of this bigger molecule. And if we could do that thousands of times in concert with a classical supercomputer, we could understand what's really going on, kind of see a piece of nature we've never been able to see before, which could give us some hope to invent an alternate way to, in an industrial process, do what Mother Nature does every day in every field, everywhere, and save the world 2% of its energy. So that's high on my list of if I was miraculously given a quantum computer. Well, let's see if we can just pick away at the global warming problem and save us 2% of the energy.
Prior to World War II, we had bombs, we had missiles, we had things that really could do a lot of damage. But the invention, the advent of nuclear weapons changed the global platform. It changed political lines. Nothing was ever the same. Today, we are looking at war once again in Europe. Ukraine, Russia, NATO, everybody seems to have nukes, and it is probably the second scariest time to be alive. I mean, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, this is our generation's Cuban Missile Crisis, is that we have a nuclear power trying to take over, trying to take some new land, expand its borders, and we have another set of nuclear powers saying, let's think about this one again. Oppenheimer, I'm sure he didn't really see the future of nuclear, like nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, nuclear submarines. Are you at all concerned about research into quantum mechanics, quantum computing, quantum chemistry, and its effects and its repercussions past, to your point, a very humane use? Hey, we want to create ammonia. We don't want to make better fertilizer. We want to feed millions of people, billions of people. Let's end world hunger. Versus a country who could look at this technology and say, I want to assert my geographical dominance and have nobody question it. Are you concerned about the applications for this technology past fertilizer?
So I think that this is a question that applies to almost every technology that DARPA works on, because we exclusively work on technologies whose invention would be strategically surprising, right? Like, we don't work on boring problems that are not going to be able to impact the world. And so that, like, you always have to think about this question. I think that's why I am so happy to work in a building where there are ethics experts, and there's this decades and decades of history in trying to think about these hard questions that relate to national defense. And so I think this is something that every DARPA program manager needs to worry about. And I'm really happy that we have the resources within DARPA and outside of DARPA to have those conversations and try to figure out not just how do we get an answer in the fastest way possible, but how do we do that responsibly and try to make sure it has positive impact. We want to make the world a better place, and we don't want to make the problem worse. And I don't think that that's at all unique to quantum computers.
Elon Musk, when he was discussing AI and his concerns about AI, he said certain things keep him up at night, like the idea that AI could be making, strategic and defense decisions on the human's behalf, and that it may not understand what we are trying to achieve. Is there any aspect of quantum research that keeps Dr. Altpeter up at night? Something that you kind of in the back of your mind, like this is a concern, and it's good that you have those ethicists at DARPA that you can bring those questions like, well, what if this happened? What if that? But is there an aspect of this research that concerns you the most or keeps you up at night?
I mean, I think anytime we have a new technology that's going to give us the capability to make the world writ large a better place, it absolutely is going to, it will keep you up at night. And I think that it's a really heavy responsibility to have at DARPA, because in one sense, this is like, it's the best job that I'll ever have. Like you get the real, in a very real sense, the chance to make the world a better place. But it, like for exactly the reasons that you're talking about, like you're constantly second guessing if you're doing things in the right way. Are you thinking about the right contingencies? Are you talking to the right people, getting the right input from academia and from industry and from government? So I think the answer is definitely yes. There are definitely things that keep you up at night. But I think DARPA is a pretty magical place in that it's one of those places where you have the power to make that positive change, and you feel like you have the people to back you up to be able to do it responsibly in a way that mitigates those risks.
I had the chance to actually visit DARPA a couple of years ago when there was a technology challenge, and it was, and as a pop science dork myself, I was just absolutely in heaven. I thought this was the coolest place to be, and I was seeing all these guys with the DARPA badges, and I'm just like, I don't know what you do, but I wish I did. I want to know more about what's going on there. One of the challenges that we face in defense is 4 stars, 3 stars, 2 stars, 1 stars, the wonderful eagles, and then there's policymakers and guys in suits. They are the purse string holders. They hold the money. How do you approach explaining the value, the defense value of quantum research against policymakers and purse holders who are probably looking at ICBMs, the biggest bang, the newest gun, and the latest cool VR thing they could put on some soldier's head? They might look at your research and think, well, this isn't doing anything for me right now. What's your approach to explaining your research to folks like that, who are the decision makers and policymakers?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I don't know how I'm trying to remember how I thought government worked when I was on the outside, right? When I was writing grants as an academic, trying to imagine what these policymakers thought. And it's now a ways back, but I know it was a big surprise. And mostly on the inside, I have been extraordinarily impressed with just the technical and professional quality of everybody I've worked with inside the U.S. government at basically every level. And so I don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all approach to how you explain this, but I think people are prepared where they don't have the technical ability to understand something. They find people to help them with that. And you give the information to people at the right level. And by and large, people don't seem to have any agenda other than let's try to spend the American taxpayers' dollars in the wisest way possible that has the best positive impact. And I see that at every level, from people in Congress to congressional aides, people at the Pentagon to other government agencies to within DARPA. And I don't go in assuming that quantum computers or whatever research I'm pitching is actually the right answer, because it's not like there's a quantum computing budget at DARPA. If you get a good idea to change the world with quantum computers, you compete against the guy who wants to cure cancer and the woman who wants to build a giant robot, and then the next guy down the line. It's really the best ideas with the best chance of changing the world for the better that get picked. And there's so much amazing stuff going on that it'd just be hubris for me to think that definitely my idea needs to be funded. So you make the best case you can. You try to explain why you think there is strategic surprise to be alleviated. What's the good that could come from this? And what's the wisest way, I think, to fund it? How much is it going to cost? And you're thankful that the people in leadership positions are just phenomenal and are able to make wise decisions about what to do with that. It from the inside, it actually works almost exactly the way that you would hope it works from the outside, which was really surprising to me, but super refreshing. You just get really amped up going to work with a phenomenal cadre of people who are just doing everything they possibly can to make the world a better place.
I would definitely rank a Gundam robot up there with quantum computing. Okay, I'm just letting you know, if I got a choice, I'm putting the two up there.
Yeah, now you understand the stress that I'm under when I pitch a new program. Like I feel like you're getting it.
100%. Tell me about your program in particular. What is probably the most proudest achievement you guys have done so far that maybe the rest of us outside the scientific and academic community, we don't know or we couldn't appreciate quite yet? Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I am going to give you a fundamentally unsatisfying answer, but I'm going to try to explain why, which is one of the exciting pieces of our job is that DARPA has a great reputation. We are by and large very trusted by the commercial community, the academic community. And so people bring us their best ideas, confident that we can keep a secret and we're not going to tell anybody what they're doing. And a lot of times we will assemble the best of the best, like a tiger team of scientists and engineers to say, well, what's going to happen if we put piece A together with piece B? Or here is a wild claim from this group. What do you think are the implications of that? And man, I have got some fantastic stories about finding ridiculously surprising scientific and technical things that we were both able to disprove and say, nope, this looks too good to be true. It is too good to be true. We don't have to worry about that. I'm going to save the US taxpayer a huge amount of money by not doing that because we proved it doesn't work. And we've got stories we said, oh my goodness, this is for real. We need to take this seriously, get a bunch of people on this. This is something that is going to change US government policy because of what we've discovered. And by and large, I can't tell you any of that because we're trusted to keep those secrets. I can tell you that my newest program, the Underexplored Systems for Utility Scale Quantum Computing program, just started. And so there's not going to be those stories to tell you anyway, because we just started. But I can say that we're really trying to chart a new path in an environment where, there are a lot of companies like scrappy startups to big industry players who are making bold claims about the ability to build one of these giant miraculous machines on a relatively short timescale. And we're skeptical by nature, right? We want to say, hey, I don't think by and large, until we see the proof, like crunchy quantitative proof, we assume something's not going to work. But if this is what some other company is developing on their own, or some other academic group is developing on their own, it can be difficult to figure out how are we going to do that, ask those hard questions, do that hard verification and validation when it's really somebody else's approach. And I think in this program, we're kind of charting a way where we can bring that red team that's going to ask the hard questions, which these companies, these groups will really appreciate. And we can discover, is there really a super fast path to one of these quantum machines that we would not, from press releases, believe at all? And I think we're really pleased that we've put together a phenomenal team to evaluate these. We've got the first 3 performers on contract, and I think I would watch this space. I think this is going to be a really exciting program where we have the potential to reveal new paths to get to useful quantum computers.
I will tell you, as an intelligence professional for 23 years, I appreciate the fact that you can't talk about these amazing achievements. But I will say that the headline here is quantum researcher excited about developments. Can't tell you about it, but he's stoked.
I know. I appreciate that, and I assume that this is not the first time that you have had to deal with this problem, and I sympathize, and I'm sorry that I was a problem interviewee today.
It's a good problem to have. I would be more concerned if you were like, nothing to report. Like, really? Okay. Last question for you, sir. What is the biggest hurdle you are facing in the realm of quantum research?
Ooh, the biggest hurdle. I think probably the biggest problem is that right now there's a huge amount of excitement, right? There's billions of dollars in private money going into trying to solve some of these world-changing problems. But in many cases, those efforts are kind of stovepipe, right? There's a ton of startups. There's dozens of startup companies who are all trying to solve a piece of the puzzle. And they're making awesome progress, but it's hard for them to share information because they're all trying to do this in a proprietary way to, because that's how capitalism works. And that's part of how it works. The incentive structure in a lot of these places is naturally, what can I do in the near term to make something useful? And I think that's natural, but it's hard. Like a hard problem that DARPA has is to try to turn that into a long-term investigation and see what's the incentive structure we can put together and the programs we can run that can figure out what's going to be possible in 20 years, in 30 years, in 50 years. And that's a really exciting challenge, but it's a really hard challenge.
Folks, that was Dr. Joe Altpeter, quantum physicist extraordinaire at DARPA. Now, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Next week, it's the final fast take. We'll be wrapping it all up. Not sure how we're going to do it, but I'll figure it out. Folks, that does it for us. I'll see you one more time at the next episode. Folks, be sure to head over to stripes.com and use promo code podcast to get 50% off your digital subscription to Stars and Stripes, the news source that has supported American service members no matter where they've been deployed to. Stars and Stripes has been there and continues to be there, so drop some characters in your address bar, stripes.com, promo code podcast, and lock yourself in for 50% off your digital subscription. This episode was brought to you by Homes for Our Troops, a nonprofit helping build and donate homes to injured post-9/11 veterans. Visit hfotusa.org for more information. Now you can hear Military Matters Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard and Sundays at noon on Wreaths Across America Radio, available on the iHeart Radio, TuneIn and Audacy apps.